in context, so together in the mix. So like I was saying earlier, you've really got to enhance the tracks and add all the different things that you're going to be adding before you can really shape them, because you don't really know what they're going to sound like. So how do you shape something that you haven't done yet, right? So I like to do the enhancement first and try and get the instrument sounding, to me, like it sounds really cool. And over time, as you get more experience, you'll start to get an idea of how you can enhance a track in a way that's going to work in context of the mix anyway. That it's actually like you're thinking in advance now. But at first, what I'd say is just enhance the tracks to where they sound cool to you. Don't spend too long on them, but just enhance them to how they work for you. And then you move on to shape, which is really listening in context. Now we're going to be listening to how we can enhance the tracks, but in context of the whole mix. So obviously, because I've already done this mix now, or at least a basic mix of it, certain frequencies have already been added or subtracted, not just to enhance the track, but also to shape them. So for example, this high pass filter over here is a great example of how we shape tracks. So by taking out the low end over here, we just clean up the track to fit better in the mix, because if we leave all the low end on all these tracks in over there, they start to sound really muddy. And we've actually got a bass guitar on this track, so we don't need all that stuff in there, right? So by shaping this out, by taking that out, it makes room now for the bass guitar to sit better. And what I can tell you is, when it comes to shaping, this session here is pretty simple. There's not a lot going on here, but this gets really, really important when you've got 40 or 50 or 60 tracks going on your session, and you've got guitars and drums or synths and all kinds of things going on. Then shaping really takes on a whole new role and a whole new meaning, where if you're not doing that, you just end up with a total mess, and it just sounds really muddy. So that's one example of how we're doing it. And you can see over here, we're taking out all of that. Bass guitar over here, you could think of this as shaping as well, how we put a low pass filter on at 12K. There's nothing above there really that's useful, maybe a bit of noise or something like that. So we're just taking it out and we're shaping it to fit in the mix. And so if you look at this analyze over here quickly, and I just play you a piece over here,
it could be something new.
So this is our spectrum over here, and you can't work on this purely, but it's just sort of a good example to use. I've tried it before, where you EQ and you watch the analyzer and see how you can shape it, and that doesn't actually work that well. You really just need to use your ears. But if we play one of these guitars over here, so this one, for example, if we took these elements, let's say I just take the EQ off only, so I'll leave everything else, the valve plugin and the LA2A and the LA3A, so the compressors. This is what it sounds like without the EQ. Right, so listen to that in the mix now.
To end when the sun went down. It could be something new, born from us two. Close your eyes and pray that will come to the...
Right, so I kind of exaggerated there a little bit, but in order to hear that track now, because it's lost that top end, in order to hear it, we've now got to bring it up a lot just to be able to hear it in the mix. But then what happens when we bring it up? Well, then all the other frequencies start coming up as well, and they start clashing with everything else, especially the vocals. They start getting in the way, and that's probably one of the main things that you got to watch out for, are other instruments clashing with the vocals. And guitars are one of the biggest problems often, because they in a very similar range, right? So when you look at that frequency analyzer again, the spectrum analyzer, the guitars are kind of in this area here.
To end when the sun went down.
Let me just solo that guitar again. Right, so it's essentially the same range as the vocal. Now look here, when we put this EQ on here, what it does to that spectrum. Right, so we're pushing it more into this top area over here, around 8K to 16K. And so when we push it up over there, it's almost like think of it like a shark fin sticking out of the water, right? So you only need to see that top of that shark fin in order to know that there's a shark there, right? And so you could kind of think about that in the same way with EQing different instruments, right? So when we add that top end over there, that's kind of sticking out of the mix now, so we don't need to make it as loud overall in order for it to get heard. So before that, when it's more flat, in order to get this thing heard, we've got to bring everything up over here, right? I hope that makes sense. And the point is, when we bring everything up, then it starts clashing with other things. So we're trying to shape these things. You could think of that as an extreme example. By adding top end here, it would be the same as taking away mid-range here as well, which is mainly where the vocal is. So that's one of the things that you can actually do. If you've got instruments clashing with your vocal, what you can do is actually take away some mid-range if you need to. So say we took an EQ over here, and let's just take a Q6, for example, and you can actually make a cut over here. For example, you'd probably want to use a wider bandwidth to make it a little bit less obvious over there. But you can do a wide frequency cut like that. Maybe that's a little bit too much over there. You've got to experiment a little bit. But you could do that, which is then making more space for the vocal basically to be heard. It'll just make it much clearer. So whatever the key focal point of your song is, and often it is the vocal. If there's vocals in the song, that's usually the thing that everyone's listening to, and it's the key thing. Then it's important to shape your other instruments around there. So that's one kind of key thing over there. Now, there's some other examples that we can have a look at over here. We've taken some things out of the lead vocal here. Now, there is an overlap between what you might consider as fixing or what you might consider as shaping. Just like there's an overlap between what you might consider enhancing or what you might consider creating space. So you could enhance a track by adding an effect like reverb, and you could also create space by adding reverb. So don't worry if there's overlap. That doesn't really matter at all. What really matters is that you're just using these as kind of filters to look at the mix and to listen to it, and to ask the question really from the beginning: am I doing this to enhance the track, or am I using it to create space? Am I doing this thing to fix something that sounds wrong, or am I doing this to shape it to fit better in the mix? So the reason that you're doing it is really the key thing, because that's going to depend on how you do it and how you go about it, right? So that just gives you a little bit of an idea now about shape and how we can kind of use it. And you can do it with all different instruments. We don't have time to get into all of that in detail here, but I just wanted to give you a basic idea. Right, then the final driver is space. And this is really just the space that the instrument or the vocal or whatever it is sitting in. So this is both from front to back, so the depth, and also the width. So how do we get depth? Well, things like reverb, delays, things like that. And width is generally just pan. So we're panning it out to the left or the right, or is it in the center? And there's a good reason why I like to leave space till last. And it's not necessarily last, but just last in the line of these 5 drivers over here. So you've seen how we've gone through each of them now, not spending too long on each one. Okay, I know it was pre-mixed already, but even when I do it, I don't spend too long on it. It's just basically enhancing it, and then getting a general idea of shape over there, and then I want to move on to space. But the reason why I put it last is because if you start adding things like reverb and stuff up front, and if you start panning, it can allow you to cheat a little bit, and it can actually cause more problems than it's actually good for. So a good example of this, and a common amateur mistake you hear so often, is someone using pan to create separation in the mix. So how we just looked at those guitars now, and how we shaped them to not only enhance them but also shape them to fit better in the mix and to not get in the way of their vocal. Well, if you pan those right up front, then it makes it kind of sound like you don't need to do that anymore, right? So it just sounds like, oh, well, that's working. I can hear the guitars and I can hear the vocals all fine, because the vocals in the middle and then the guitars out to the side. Well, it creates a bit of a false sense of shape over there, if you want to use that term, where it sounds like it's working, but it's not really. So the best thing to do, I find it's better to rather mix in mono as long as possible, and get it working, get the mix working in mono. By mono I mean so nothing panned out to the side, all down the middle, and some interfaces